Hello and welcome, my fellow nerds, back to Nerd In, or if you're new here, thanks for stopping by. I am Christian, and I'll be your host for tonight. Now, today, we're going to be taking a little dive into my board game collection. This is going to be more so for me as a posterity piece, so I can look back in the future and be like, okay, what games did I have at this time? What have I added to my collection since then? But maybe it's also a chance for you to see some new games that maybe you haven't come across before, or at least just get kind of my take on them. I'll give you little pieces about each game, maybe a little bit of my history with it, or what I like about them, things like that. And I'm just going to be going through the whole collection today. So this is probably a fairly long video. My collection isn't as big as a lot of other content creators in the sphere that do this kind of stuff, but I feel like I have a pretty decent sized collection, and I just wanted to go ahead and show it to you guys. And as we're going through this, I'm not going to give you like my top 10s or anything. None of this is organized. I literally just have my stacks of games all right next to me right here, ready to go. And we're going to go through each one. If you want to see my top 10 favorites out of all of these, I will have a video for that coming up, so stay tuned. And let's go ahead and get into the video. So before I start any of this today, I do want to say that I hope you guys had a good holiday season or are having a good holiday season. This is going to be coming up after Christmas, so I really hope that you guys had a good time during that season. But anyways, let's get into some games. Starting off, Lost Ruins of Arnak. I had high hopes for this game. I really wanted it to be a good one, but it is the biggest just mess that I've ever seen. I know that there's third-party inserts for this, but a lot of those cost like the same price as what I got the game for, and thanks to this mess, I've never really gotten it to my table. I've set it up a couple of times, but by the time that I got it set up and was reading the rule book and trying to get through all of it, I got to the point where I was just so tired I didn't even want to play anymore, so I put everything back away, and that's happened a couple times now. So I've never actually played this game, but it sits on my shelf in shame. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I still want to play it. I still want to give it a try because it looks like a good game, but I just can't get I can't get away from the mess that is inside of this box. It is so horrendous. I'm so sorry to the designers. I'm sure you did a great game. It got awards. It's a well-known and well-loved game. I just cannot stand the inside of this box. It actually just gives me so much pain whenever I think about even setting it up. I just instantly, it's a headache as soon as I think about this game. I am so sorry. Next up is Juicy Fruits. This one was actually picked by my wife. We went to our local game store. We were just kind of browsing around. I wanted new stuff to add to the collection. I think I picked up 2 other games at that time, but she had her eyes on this one and she wanted to try it. And we actually walked away with a surprisingly good game. It definitely looks like a game that's made for children. The cover is very, very unassuming, but it's quite a nice game. You have these tiles, these fruit tiles that you're moving around your player board to gain that many fruit, depending on how many spaces you moved. And then you got to buy other tiles to be able to sell to a market and get all these upgrades and do all. It's a really cool game. There's a solo mode to it that's not really all that great. I mean, it's kind of just like playing the normal game with a bot that is very hard to beat. So, I mean, overall, it's an easy one to get to my table. My friend group loves it. Even my non-gamers enjoy this game because it's not overly complicated, but it has a decent amount of thought and strategy to it. And really not a whole lot of luck. The only randomness that comes to this game is what tiles go on the market and where they end up. Otherwise, you just kind of get to slap down and play, and it's a good time. It plays in probably about an hour, depending on how many people you have, but I would say it's a worthwhile game to own. If you just want something simple that can maybe help non-gamers get into the hobby, this is a good time for that. Next up is one of the first games I ever purchased, and that is Night of the Living Dead, a Zombicide game. This, I love this game, but it doesn't really see play at my table anymore, and the reason that I got this game to begin with is because I'm a huge horror movie fan, I'm a huge zombie movie fan, and most of all, I'm a huge George A. Romero fan. Night of the Living Dead is my favorite movie of all time, so of course, I see this game on the shelf, I have to get it. There's just no choice for me but to get it. I had some good fun with it, had a couple of non-gamers give it a try, and they've enjoyed it. We got through, I think, the first scenario, and then we were going to pick it back up, and then sadly we never did, but it's a little bit of a hassle to get to the table. There's a decent amount of setup, and of course you got to deal with the zombies every round constantly spawning. So it's a little tedious at times, but it's overall a great cooperative game, I think. It's definitely an Ameritrash game. There's a lot of dice hucking and direct combat and things like that, but I got this before I knew what either Ameritrash or Eurogames meant. I just saw the cover and said, that's my game. I own this now, that is my game. And I have enjoyed the playthroughs that I have gotten out of it. Do not get it wrong. But if you're not a huge fan of this style of game, I definitely understand you skipping it. Right now, it's kind of a decorative piece for me. I do hope to play it again someday, but it's definitely not at the top of my priority list. Next up here, we have Viticulture Essential Edition. This is another one of those games that I really, really wanted to love. When it comes to alcohol, I'm not a drinker. I am of age. But I don't really drink a whole lot, and when I do, it usually tends to be something like wine. So I'm like, oh, well, I can own a winery here and be able to make my own wine, let it age, get some resources. I loved the look of the components. Everything about this game really just screamed to me, especially the box size. It has a decently small presence for your shelf, but a pretty decent table presence, and there's a lot of cool things you could do in it. It is still a good game. I still enjoy it, but it's really hard for me to get my friends into it, so usually I end up playing it solo, and the Automa in this one is not my favorite out of the Stonemaier games, so it is a little bit harder for me to be in the mood to play this, but still a good game. I would still ultimately recommend it, especially if it's kind of in your wheelhouse of play style. That's the biggest thing for me, is the play style of it. So that is Viticulture Essential Edition. Next up here is Cascadia. This one was a little unassuming to me. It didn't... All the videos that I saw on it, it didn't seem that great. The pieces looked kind of cheap and just thrown together, and I mean, you get inside the box and it's not really all that much to look at. You get a bag, you get some tiles, and you get a score pad. And to me, I was like, well, this looks like an okay beginner game, you know, teach some new people just to get them into the hobby. And once I got into it and I started playing it, I discovered so much more. This is an easy to understand, but somewhat difficult to master type of game with a litany of decisions you're having to make at every turn. You have to think, do I want the tile to expand my habitats? Do I want the animal to expand my scoring goals with them? Or do I waste a nature token and get both? Or do I feel like I wasted a nature token anyways? Because most of the time it's not a waste, but they are hard to come by, so it does kind of feel like it. And this is just, for the size of this box and what it does, it is a very good game. It is a very good game to own. I recommend it be in just about anybody's collection. Again, it's not one I play a whole lot. But when I'm in the mood for it, or I'm teaching somebody new a game, and I just want something to grab and go, be easy to play, I usually tend toward Cascadia. It's such a fulfilling and rewarding game that also punishes you at every turn. But it's also such a heartwarming game just celebrating the Pacific Northwest of America, which coincidentally I am in that region, so this definitely appeals to me in quite a nice way. That is Cascadia. Next up is Smartphone. This is one of my more recent purchases here from Arcane Wonders and Cosmodrome Games. The only thing that really appealed to me about this game was its mechanisms. It has the 2 tablets that each player gets, and you're overlaying them to determine what actions you get for the round. I thought that was just such a cool concept. I really wanted to try it out. This is another one of those games where the box drives me nuts. It has inserts, it has decent inserts, but the lid and the box itself are just slightly too short, so it never closes all the way, and it just hurts me a little inside, you know. Maybe I laid out something wrong. There is always the chance that something is not put in here correctly, but I can't find a way to make it work. But overall, I just love this game. The components feel great. The mechanisms are really cool. But it is another one of those more heavy-ish Euro-style games. Some would probably say it's like a heavy medium-weight game. For me, it just, like, it's one of those guilty pleasures I have on my shelf that I want to play. I look at it, I think about it, like, it sounds so cool, but I have so many other games that I would rather play over this. So Smartphone was kind of a hard one. It was more bought on a whim decision. I was in the store, and it was the only one that really looked appealing to me. And instead of saying, well, maybe I just shouldn't get a game today, my impulses told me, you need to get a game, so I got Smartphone. I don't really regret it. it is still a fun game. I just hardly ever get to play it, and it's very sad. Next up here is a classic around the globe, and that is Wyrmspan, if I can turn the lid correctly here. Wyrmspan by Stonemaier Games. This is, I believe, a direct sequel to Wingspan, which I do also have coming up later in the video. But Wyrmspan is the dragon version of Wingspan. They added a ton of new different mechanics to it, and just there's a lot more to this game than the original. I definitely prefer this a lot more. I mean, I prefer the theme of dragons over birds. I'm not a huge bird kind of guy, but dragons are very cool. Being able to raise my own and fill up these caves with dragons is a very cool thing. It's a nice kind of tableau engine builder, and if you've never played either of the Span games, Wyrmspan is a fantastic choice, although it is a little bit meatier than its older brother, so do keep that in mind. If you want an easier experience, Wingspan is probably going to be better. If you want the more in-depth experience with a similar gameplay style, Wyrmspan is the way to go, hands down. I love this game. It is good. It is a very good game. Good job, Stonemaier. Even the Automa is pretty well designed, so kudos to you. Alright, and next up here is another one of my wife's picks, but one that I actually really love. This is Tang Garden. You are an engineer during the Tang Dynasty trying to design the perfect garden for the Emperor. There's so many different aspects to this. You have to worry about trees, you have to worry about flowers, you have to worry about the geography of the whole garden. You have to worry about what's off in the distance in the landscape and where people are facing. There's a lot of interesting different mechanics to this that make it a fairly in-depth game with a decent amount of complexity. It's not super hard to learn, but it does take a little bit of effort. But what you get is a really, really good experience. It's a surprisingly cozy game for such a thinky one. You're building out a garden and everything looks gorgeous and beautiful, and it's just a great time. It's like you're building a garden for yourself. You ignore the whole actual thematic part of it, of building a garden in the Tang Dynasty for the Emperor. But it's just, I mean, it's just gorgeous. Look at that garden up there and tell me that isn't gorgeous. You probably can't see it all that well, but this is definitely a great game, and one that really took me by surprise. My wife just saw the theme, saw that it was about building a garden, and said, alright, let's get it. And I said, you know what, fine. I wasn't thrilled about it at first, but then I sat down and played it, and it was a fantastic time. I do not regret this at all. Alright, next up here is actually a set of boxes. This is Happy Little Dinosaurs by Unstable Games, and along with it, I have the two box expansions, Hazards Ahead and the 5 to 6 player expansion pack. In theory, you could combine both of these expansions with the base game to play up to 8 players, and it would be absolute chaos. But Happy Little Dinosaurs is essentially a multiplayer game of war that has a bunch of bonus cards with effects. It's a trick-taking game. You're trying to play out the highest value so that you can avoid disasters and be able to move along your board to avoid becoming an extinct dinosaur. And there's different things you get with the expansions. I've mostly only played the base game, and it already on its own is fantastic, but the expansions do add that little bit extra. And there is just separate card packs as well that just add to the card pool. They don't add more dinosaurs to it. I just didn't want to grab those because they're so small it's tedious to get, but there's like 5 expansions, I think, for Happy Little Dinosaurs, and all of them are great. So if you just want an easy, fun game, it's 2 to 4 players base, and then again with the expansions, you can make it up to 8 if you really stretched it. And yeah, it's a good time. It's an easy one to get to my table. My non-gamer friends love it. It's super simple, super easy to pull out. It is always welcome on my shelf. Next up is a very thinky game for 2 clever cats. It is Boop. This was a demand by my wife. It's cat theme, it's simple, it's 2 players, it's everything that my wife wanted out of a game, and we got it. I am not mad about it. It is the silliest version of a chess-like game that I've ever seen, and it's adorable through and through. You cannot go wrong with this game. It's a very quick play, very easy teach, and it's just a fun time. You just get to be cats booping each other off a bed, and you even use the box as part of the board with this little cushion mat thing that is just adorable, and it feels kind of nice. But yeah, you just literally take the box and flip it over, you throw your mat on top, and that's how you play. And it's the lightest box I've ever seen. I mean, maybe a little bit oversized for what it needed to be, but since it's being used as the board, I understand it. And it's still not even that big of a shelf presence. It is nice and small, very well fits in my hand. If I ever go on trips, I know this is coming with me and my wife, just to have an easy game to sit in the hotel and play and have a blast with. So that is Boop. I know there's like several other versions of this as well. We plan on getting the Halloween one at some point, and she's probably going to talk me into the Christmas version. So this is here for now, but I'm sure we're going to have more of these in the near future. Next up is another Unstable Games game, and that is Casting Shadows. This game was not at all what I expected it to be. When I first stumbled across it, the videos I watched made it sound like it was a dungeon crawler, and for Unstable Games, that had me intrigued. I really wanted that to be the case. It's not, but I can't say I'm disappointed with what it is. Everyone takes on the role of a different mage in different locations, and you're just slinging spells at each other. That's all you're doing the whole game, is trying to attack everyone else and take them out as these wizards. And all of the tiles have different abilities, all of the characters have different abilities, there's a ton of different spells you can get access to. It's a really neat game. I do like it. I just love Unstable Games in general. I have not had a game from them that I did not like yet. So, Casting Shadows, while it wasn't what I wanted it to be, it wasn't what I expected it to be, it is still a good game, and I do still enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to expansions for this game as well. Next up here is on a lot of people's disappointment list, but I absolutely love it. It is Turing Machine. This is just a code puzzle game, and all it is you get these cards that give you hints as to what the 3-number combination is, and you have to deduce what those are. It's just a code puzzle deduction game, and it's one of those that, I mean, it does take up a decent amount of space. It's not a table hog by any means, but it's not just like a you can pull it out anywhere sort of thing. But I enjoy it just for being able to have a cozy, puzzly game that I can just pop out on a Saturday morning and just tease my brain a little bit, force me to think. I'm a mathematic type of guy. I enjoy numbers, so a game like this really called to me very quickly, and I do really enjoy it. I've played it with one other person, but so far I mostly prefer it as a solo experience, just to knock out a couple of puzzles and, yeah, like I said, get my brain flowing. It's a very nice game for that. It's very unassuming, but it does well at what it does, I think, and I thoroughly enjoy this. Alright, next up is yet another wife pick, and that is Floats My Ghost. It's a game. It exists. I don't hate it. It's an alright game to play. It's a good filler game, I would say. It plays fairly quickly, and you don't really have to use your brain for this. You're just rolling a die to determine what you do that turn. So it's very deterministic, and it's very luck-based. But you're just a player with goats that's trying to get the most goats on this ship that you can. So you're rolling a die to either build a ship, move parts around on the ship, put goats on the ship, or just screw things over. It's a 12-sided die, so it does have some variability to it, but it is really just overall one of those little goofy games that you could just bust out and have a few minutes of fun with it. It's not something I'm going to sit there and play all night, but it will get to my table, and it will get some laughs. So that is Floats My Goats for 2 to 4 players. Alright, next up is a fan favorite. I have the Flamecraft Deluxe Edition, and I'm very glad I went with the Deluxe Edition. Nothing against any of you that didn't. The upgraded components for this are just so beautiful that I couldn't resist it. Your board is this neoprene mat, which just feels fantastic. And your dragons going around this town, activating abilities in shops to collect goods, and then enchant those shops to get more rewards out of them. And it's just a really nice, cozy Euro game that's, again, not that hard to teach. It's kind of a running theme in my house. If I find a game that's not too hard to teach and it looks fun and cozy, it's probably going to find a space on my shelf. But Flamecraft was one that was very hyped up, so I knew I had to try it. I ended up finding one of the deluxe Kickstarter editions, and yeah, it was well worth it. It is a game that I have enjoyed quite thoroughly, and I do think should be in a lot of people's collections. Flamecraft is a very, very good time. So, there's that. Next up is one that I wanted to be a little bit better than it is, but it's still not bad, and that is Corridor Pac-Man. I saw Base Corridor floating around all the time like crazy for a while when I first got into the hobby, and I was very intrigued by it. It seemed like a very nice 2-player head-to-head game that was almost chess-like, but you only get one piece and then a bunch of walls to block your opponent. Corridor Pac-Man expands on that, where it still has the base version of Corridor, the direct head-to-head two-player game. It also has a four-player version where players are on each side of the board, and that can get very chaotic. But the big draw to this version is the five-player version, where one player takes on Pac-Man and the other four are the ghosts trying to eat him. So you basically get to play Pac-Man on your table and build out the map while you're doing so. The quality of these pieces is astounding. I will say that I am very, very pleased by how the pieces are in this game. And it is still very fun, but it's one of those that you kind of need the right circumstance to do it. Getting exactly 5 people to do the Pac-Man version is a little odd sometimes. So usually I'm still playing this in just the base 2-player version with the Pac-Man pieces, which is, it's still great. It's still fun. But I would like to do more of the Pac-Man, you know? I think that would be a lot more fun. So, can I say I'm disappointed by this game? No, not really. I still love it. It's still fantastic. Do I want more out of it or maybe wish I could do more with it? Absolutely. It was a game I really had my hopes up for to see a lot of play, and it sadly just doesn't see a whole lot. But when it does, it's a good time. Next up here is another Stonemaier game. We have Apiary. This is bees going to space. You heard that sentence, right? Bees in space. What more do you need out of this? This is a fantastic worker placement that changes up the model of worker placement a little bit by giving your workers a strength. And then if they max out their strength and go to work again, oops, they have to retire now, or in this case, they hibernate, and you get bonuses off of doing that, too. Everything about this game is just one big puzzle. It's a nice point salad Euro, done in a way that doesn't necessarily feel like that's all it is. There's a lot that you're doing in this game, and I love every bit of it. It actually, to me, it feels like a somewhat meatier version of another game that I have coming later on, and I love this game to death. It has a good solo mode. Again, another well-designed Automa that really interacts with the game in a way similar to how a player would, but also breaks some of the rules a little bit. But it's a very good game. It's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more, again, on that medium heavyweight side. It's definitely not a heavy Euro by any means, but it will take a little bit of effort to learn and get a hold of. But once you do, it is such a great experience. Definitely recommend Apiary. You're probably getting sick of this by now, but I swear this is the last time you're going to hear it. We have another Stonemaier Games game. This was not originally Stonemaier, I don't believe, but it was Paolo Mori who came back and redesigned Libertalia, turning it into Libertalia Winds of Galecrest. I'm probably going to hear some flack for this. There's a lot of people that prefer the original Libertalia with its very gritty and dark pirate theme, whereas this one takes on more of an explorative sky pirate furry theme. And while I'm not a huge fan of that downgrade, the upgrade is in the game itself. The gameplay is so good. And the fact that they made a solo mode for this, it's delicious. I love it. I know that like people are probably going to look at this and say, what, Libertalia solo mode? That sounds horrible. But it's actually really well done. For a game like this, I would not have expected the solo mode to be that great. This is meant to be a head-to-head battler. You're just going against your friends, doing a bunch of pirating and backstabbing and mutinying and looting and all sorts of stuff like that. Everything pirate. To do it solo sounds wrong, but the way that they implemented it is actually really good. I would actually say the worst way to play this version of Libertalia is at 2 players. 2 players is by far the worst way to play this game. 1 player and then 3 and up are the best ways. 2 players still not bad, but there's just a whole lot less to 2 player than there should be for what the rest of the experiences give. And it's a very odd game in the sense that you get a different experience with this game depending on your player count, which is something I will go over in the review that I am actively working on for this game because I absolutely love it and I want to give you guys an honest review of it. But for a quick one, there you go. I love Libertalia. It is a fan-freaking-tastic game. Next up is the most recent addition to my collection and the most recent addition to my heart and my love for board games, and that is Ostia. And this does include the Pirates expansion. I somehow managed to fit it in this box. It was not very easy, but this is by far I would say this is probably either my heaviest or my second heaviest game in my entire collection. But I love every second of it. Recently, I got into the whole sea theme. It's never something I've liked before. I've never been a huge fan of aquatic stuff or boats or any of that. But ever since I got into board games, I've started loving it. And it's like become an obsession. But in Ostia, you are part of the Roman Empire with a fleet of ships trading to other markets to advance yourself in the area and become a more prominent figure of it. But your action selection in this, because it is an action selection game, is based off of a Mancala style effect, where you select a section on your port, you gain that many resources based on how many boats you have in that area, and then you move those boats Mancala style. Wherever the last boat ends up is the action you get for the turn. So there's a lot of thinking and foreplanning on this. You really have to be like 3 steps ahead at all times if you want to gain any sort of advantage in this game. And it's a puzzle I haven't been able to crack yet. I am trying my hardest. I've already been through several playthroughs, and I am trying my hardest to figure it out. But man, I figured out most of the mechanics. I'm still ironing some stuff out. But what I have gotten out of this game is so much joy and pleasure out of playing Ostia. Having a game with that Mancala effect, it was inspired by Trajan. If you're familiar with that game, it's going to have very similar Mancala style effects, and it's so well done for such a heavy game. I love the heck out of Ostia, and I haven't messed around with the Pirates expansion too much. I mostly got that because I was mostly so I could get Ostia. But I figured while I was there, I might as well get the Pirates expansion because it was available, so that in that way, if I ever wanted to play it later on, I would have that expansion available to be able to play it. I have tried it. It is not bad. I need to finish figuring out base game Ostia first, though, before I get much further with that. And next up here, we have Honey Buzz. This is the game that I was saying Apiary was kind of like a beefier version of, and in some ways it's true, some ways it's not. The biggest thing is that you are a bee colony that has learned economics. Again, what more do you need to know? But this is a fantastic worker placement and tile placement game where you're sending out workers to gather tiles to expand your hive, to give you actions, to be able to do things like grow nectar and make honey and then sell it off to the markets to all of the local wildlife to get points. And there are so many cool things about this game. It is a more basically dead center medium weight Euro that has so much good vibes to it. Of course, I got the deluxe edition for this again with the Honeypot expansion. It has been nothing but a good time at my table. My wife absolutely loves it. It's one of the most adorable, cozy games that I have. Everything feels so nice in your hands. It all plays so well. It's very well and intricately designed, and it gives you a different experience each time you play it, and I can't get enough of Honey Buzz. It is a fantastic game. If you can get your hands on it, I very, very much recommend. Alright, and now we have another recent addition to my collection. Not as recent as Ostia, but still pretty recent. It is Mycelia, the strategic mushroom game. This one I actually got for different reasons than you might expect. I got this one because I was in the market for a mushroom-themed game, and it wasn't Mycelia. I wanted Mycelium, a mushling. I think it was like a mushling game or something like that. It's the one that almost looks like a mushroom version of Catan, almost. But I can't find it anywhere. Literally, I've searched everywhere in shops. I've searched online. I cannot find a copy of Mycelium anywhere. And there's actually 2 versions, I think, of Mycelium. There's like 2 different designers that use the same name, or that might have been Mycelia. There's 3 different games that have almost this exact name, and I really wanted a mushroom game. I wanted a mushroom-based game. Don't ask me why. I just love mushrooms. They're gorgeous. But I saw this one at my local game store, and I said, you know what? I've been eyeing this one forever. It's a mushroom-themed game. It looks pretty tactile, pretty, strategic, as everything here leads you to believe. And that's exactly the experience it delivers. It's a very strategic mushroom game with a little bit of luck to it, but that is part of the strategy, is playing around that luck. And I just love it. It's such a good puzzly experience. It really forces me to think. It's it's just such a good time. And I love the fact that you build the board as you go that you're playing on and that everybody gets to play on. But just all of the different mechanics are involved in this game and how relatively simple it is on the surface, but how deep it gets once you actually start playing it is fantastic. I love just taking this one with me when I know I'm going to have some spare time and enough space to just knock out a solo game in about 40 minutes. And theoretically, in a multiplayer game, you can have a game that never ends if you really feel like pushing it, but there's a lot of reasons for that to not happen, so I don't think that's too much of an issue. But Mycelia, fantastic game. If it shows up at your local game store, pick it up immediately. It is a very, very good time. If you like something that is thinky, but doesn't take up too much shelf or table presence, it is so worth it. It definitely does not overstay its welcome at all. It is always going to be here. I love Mycelia. Alright, we are finally starting to whittle down the collection here. We're probably about halfway through at this point, I think. Before we keep moving on, though, if you guys can guess my top 10 or any of my top 10 out of this list down in the comments, give it a try. If you get any of them right, I'll give you a crisp high five in one of my next videos, when I remember. But go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you think are on my top 10 games. Or if there's any games that you really enjoy out of this list, let me know as well. I'd definitely love to hear what you guys think about my games, or if you have any recommendations for games that I should have, leave it down below. Let's go ahead and get into the second half of this. So next up we have Framework. I got this, I believe, at the same time that I got Cascadia, and I was expecting to have around the same experience with the games. Not even close. It was not even remotely a competition for which one was better. Cascadia wins hands down. Framework is... it's a neat little puzzle game. It's not one I've pulled out in a while. It kind of just sits on my shelf at this point. I am very much of a tug-of-war with this on whether or not I want to keep it, because it is an easy puzzle game to show people to just take to a function and be like, hey, I got this quick little game we can pull out. But I feel like I have so many other options for that at this point that I don't know if I have a reason to keep this. I expected it to be a good time. I really did, and it was enjoyable. It was fun for a little while. When I was very early on in board games, and I was still kind of figuring out the hobby as a whole and trying to get into the upper games when I was still just a little baby learning all this stuff, this was a good game for that. But I think now it's kind of outlived its welcome in my home, and I think it's probably going to be making its way out here before long. So that's Framework. You guys might find yourselves enjoying it. Like I said, it's just a neat little puzzle game, but it's nothing that like breaks the mold or really gets me excited for it all the time. So I don't know what's going to happen with it, to be honest. I'm very on the fence. Next up is the first party game that's on my list, and that is going to be Wavelength. This is the game of spectrums. You get 2 items that are on opposite ends of a spectrum. The psychic for each team is going to spin a wheel to see where that spectrum is, and they have to name something that's in between those 2 items based on where that lands to try to get their team to guess what position on that track it is to get points. It's a neat little party game where you kind of have to know the person that you're dealing with, and if the other team knows them better, they're going to get rewarded better. It's a very interesting game. It's a nice one to bust out. It's the only party game I have that I really enjoy. Which isn't saying a whole lot, because this is half of my party game collection, so that tells you pretty much all you need to know. I'm not a huge party game guy, but this one I can mess with. This one I can enjoy. It's a good time. And for my last party game on this list, we have Hues and Cues. I'm pretty convinced at this point that I'm colorblind. I am awful at this game. Whether it comes to giving clues as to what the color is or trying to guess those clues, I am awful at this game. I don't know for a video editor and someone who does color grading and stuff, I am awful with colors, apparently. My wife will kick my butt at this game every time she gets the chance, but it still sees some play. My friend group does enjoy it, so it does come out from time to time. It's just, It's not my cup of tea, and that's all there is to it. This was definitely a wife's pick, so it's gonna stay. She enjoys it, so I will continue to play it and grit my teeth through it every time, which is very unfortunate. Hopefully I find something better in the future. That is Hues and Cues. It might be your thing, it is just not mine, and I'm sorry. Alright, so next up, big brother to Wyrmspan, it is Wingspan, baby, and this is... Yeah, to me it's kind of the gutless version of Wyrmspan. I prefer Wyrmspan through and through. I only got this because at the time, Wyrmspan wasn't available. I didn't have a way to get a hold of it, but I really wanted to test out the mechanics and get familiar with it, so I got Wingspan, and then I got Wyrmspan later on that same year, and... Yeah, Wingspan, it's here. People love it. It's a classic in the hobby. I know there's all sorts of good expansions for it and whatnot. I just prefer the way that Wyrmspan plays. To me, there's a lot more to it, and I prefer that. But again, when you're trying to get people into higher up games, you're trying to get them more into that medium weight class, Wingspan is a good way to do it. I definitely would recommend it for that, but if you're looking for the better experience, personally, to me, Wyrmspan is going to be the better one, 10 out of 10 times. But I'm keeping Wingspan for the teachability of it. That's pretty much it. It's a fairly approachable game. Lots of people know about it. Even people that are outside the hobby probably might have a chance of at least knowing this. So I have it for that reason, but if I want to play one of the Span games, I'm always going to go Wyrmspan. So I'm sorry to Wingspan lovers. I prefer Wyrmspan. That's all there is to it. Wingspan's not a bad game. I just have a preference over it. Next up is another one of my early game purchases, one of the ones that really broke me into the hobby, and that is the Kickstarter edition of the Fox Experiment. It didn't necessarily matter that it was a Kickstarter version, but my local game store happened to have it in stock, and I love Foxes. This was at a time when I was buying board games based on theme and not how they played. So I did end up with some purchases that I'm not necessarily the happiest with, but I'm not really regretting them either. The Fox Experiment is the only roll and write game that I actually enjoy. I think it's also the only one that I currently own. But it's just a good time. You're breeding foxes to try to get the friendliest fox, and it's just great. Everything feels so good about it. It's a great time. Plays in 5 rounds. It's fairly easy to understand. The rulebook could use some help, but once you're able to kind of get through it and grasp it on your own, it's an easy play, and it's a fairly easy teach. Like, it really doesn't take a whole lot of effort to teach someone. It's fairly straightforward, even if it doesn't seem like it when you're going through the rulebook. The rulebook definitely took me a few reads to actually understand it and piece things together, but if you combine that with using BGG to get stuff on the forums about it, I'm sure you'll have no problem at all figuring this game out, and it is a good time. This one will always live in my heart, even if it doesn't live on my table. Next up is another board game classic. It is Quacks of Quedlinburg. I actually only just recently picked this up because I wasn't too sure about it. A push your luck game to me didn't really sound all that intriguing, but then I got into it, and it's a good game. I mean, it's fairly simple, but the amount of stuff that's in here, the thinkiness to it is more than you would expect out of a push your luck game, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that have said enough about this game out there. All I want to say is that I just got this recently, but what I've played of it so far, I have really enjoyed, and I am happy to have this on my shelf now, even if it's not the best looker out there. Next up, this is the last one of these, I promise. We have another Unstable Games edition. It is Here to Slay, and I have 2 of the expansions in here. I believe it was the Berserkers and Necromancers, and then the Warriors and Druids I have added into this, so it can theoretically... It'll still only play up to 6, I think, or you might be able to go higher than that, but it does expand the endgame conditions of this and adds a bit more to the game. The base game itself, though, is still fantastic. It's not really a combat game per se, but you're building out your fantasy party with thieves and rangers and fighters and all of those classes. It's kind of a D&D themed game, and you get to build out your party and go fight monsters. That's the whole goal of the game. Either you build up a full party and you win, or you successfully beat 3 monsters and you win. And it's a good time, another easy one to get to my table for my non-gamer friends. It's super, super easy to learn. and has so much. It's just so much fun. It's nothing to take seriously. None of the unstable games you're meant to take seriously. They're just a good, fun time to bring to the table, and I love them for that. Next up is my favorite two-player only experience, and that is Kelp. Just released this year. I did back this on Kickstarter, full disclaimer on that. I usually don't do Kickstarters, but this one had enough promise that I knew I had to, and I don't regret any of it at all. This game is a fantastic asymmetric two-player battler game. The octopus is trying to hide from the shark and eat its food, and the shark is trying to eat the octopus before it becomes exhausted and starves. And you need to play the game to really understand it, but it is such a fantastic time. I absolutely love Kelp. I've even got my wife to play it, and she's not a huge gamer either, but even she enjoyed this. The only sad part is that every time I've played Kelp, I've been forced to be the shark. I want to play octopus once, man. I want the experience of hiding with all those tiles. It looks like so much fun, but nope, I'm always the shark, I guess. It is what it is. I will still continue to love this game for a long time, though. Kelp is fantastic. Next up is a game I actually got because I liked how it played, not because of the theme. And I'm saying that now because the theme isn't all that important to me for this game. I really enjoy its mechanisms. That is Daybreak. This is a fantastic game. It's about fighting climate crisis, which doesn't really sit high on my radar. I'm going to warn you now. But it is a good game. It is a very, very fun game. It's from the people who made Pandemic, and it does kind of show a little bit, but also not. It still stands as its own game. It's a very good cooperative experience, or even just a really fun and rewarding solo experience. It starts off feeling stressful, but as you pick things up, you're like, oh, no, this is actually fine. But what I like about this is it has limitless replayability. There's a whole deck of challenge cards in here that modify the game to make it either easier or more difficult. It can apply to one player, it can apply to multiple players. There's even some cards that keep the difficulty level the same, it just changes things up a little bit to make it different. And I absolutely love that level of thought in a game. There was so much effort put into designing this, and I love it. They did an absolutely fantastic job with Daybreak. Would always recommend it. Again, not for the theme, just for how it plays. It's fantastic. I love it. Now, next up is one that I got for both theme and mechanism. This one actually worked out to be both, and it was also fairly early on in my board game collection. And that is Septima. Again, the deluxe version. I can't help myself. I found a site called The Game Steward, and they only sell Kickstarter versions of games, so obviously I saw the shiny stuff, and I got hooked, but this was a game that was so worth getting the deluxe edition for. There's so many good things to it. I could rave about this game all day. Of course, I won't. I will eventually do a review on this, but give me a second. This is the only game that I have ever made artwork of. I am not an artist. I will stress that right now. I am not a painter. I'm not a drawer. I'm not any of that. But I painted this because I love this game so much. I love the theme. I love the looks. I love the way it plays. It is a heavier game, though. This is the one that I think is, in comparison with Ostia, for its level of difficulty and weight. It's hard for me to say which one is more weighty than the other, or if they're at the same level. It's really hard for me to judge that. They're both pretty rough in that regard, but they have such good experiences behind them that I just adore them with all my being. And this is a game I got before I understood weight and complexity in board games and all that stuff. I thought it was going to be fairly easy, and I was proven very wrong very quickly. There's even still a part of my brain that tells me, no, it's fine, it's not that hard. And then I sit down and play it, and I'm like, oh, there's a lot to this. And from what I hear people say, this is actually one of Mind Clash Games' easier board games. So, I don't know, I might have to delve more into this group and see more of what they're about, but I have enjoyed Septima a ton. I do quite enjoy this game. Alright, here is my last two-player only experience, and one of the most hyped games for the year. It is SkyTeam. I like it. It's a good game. I think it might be a little overhyped, though. I think people put a little more attention on this game than it maybe deserves. Don't get me wrong, it is a fantastic game. I do enjoy playing it. That silent aspect while cooperatively playing is interesting. The fact that you have to speak in vague terms and you can't just say, like, hey, if you get this number, put it here, and things like that. You kind of have to infer and imply a lot of things. It's a good experience. Would I rate it as one of the top games of the year? I could see it being on a top 10 list at, like, the higher ends of it, being at, like, the 10s, or maybe even bubbling into that 11 to 20 list. It is a good game. It is a well-designed and well-thought-out game. I don't see it getting the hype that it has. That's probably just me. That's probably just a personal thing. Like I said, it's still a great game. I just feel like there's a lot of other really good options out there, though. To put that high it's a bit tough for me. But again, still a good time. If you want a good two-player cooperative silent experience, give it a shot. Try it out. I mean, it's not super expensive. Of course, if you can find a board game cafe or somebody that has this, you can try borrowing it. Just keep an open mind about it, I guess. Don't take my review too to heart. I'm not trying to speak bad on the game. It's just not that much of my cup of tea. It's good, but it's not along the lines of a game that I would be on the lookout for all the time. I picked it up because of all the hype, and I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't as excited about it, I guess, is where I'll go with that. And I'll stop that there before I dig myself an even deeper hole with SkyTeam. Alright, next up we actually have a twofer. This is from Kids Table Board Games. Two games that I actually got earlier on in my experience once again, that I also picked up from the Game Steward as the Kickstarter versions. And I'm very, very glad with these ones that I went with the Kickstarter versions, because I looked at the upgrades for them. They are so worth it if you can find these versions. But the base games are still fine too. It's just the upgrades that they did to these are so nice. And that is Creature Comforts and Maple Valley, the sequel to Creature Comforts. Creature Comforts is kind of a push your luck dice rolling game that has some mitigations to that luck. It's a very cozy game about critters crafting comfort items for the winter, putting together different foods, knitted items, things like that, for these creatures to get through their winter hibernation cycle, to make it to the next spring. Maple Valley is the spring afterwards, where you're preparing for the spring festival as the kids of these critters in the original one, where you're collecting goods to make festivities to make the festival that much more exciting and cozy. These are two very cozy comfort games. They play totally differently. Each one delivers a very nice, wholesome experience, though, and I could never see my collection without them. I definitely prefer Maple Valley over Creature Comforts, but I'm not as much of a dice chucker fan as a lot of people are. I prefer the trick-taking aspects of Maple Valley. But Creature Comforts is still a very good, comforting game. Still a very good time. Kids Table Board Games really delivered well on both of these, and yeah, I love KTBG. I backed their latest Kickstarter, Lairs, and I'm excited for it to come next year. So look forward to hopefully a review of that next December, I believe, is when it's scheduled. But we'll see how that goes. Don't get your hopes too high up. On to the next. And from the creators of Cascadia comes Calico, another wonderfully delightful experience to my table. Again, it's the Kickstarter version, but it doesn't really change much to my understanding. It's just got a couple of add-ons, and that's like the biggest thing about it. But Calico is a wonderfully puzzling experience. You might look at this and think it's cats and quilts. What's exciting about that? Well, people kind of thought the same thing about Patchwork, about it just being putting together a quilt. But this one delivers it in a different and very colorful way. There are so many ways to score points in this game that you're kind of whipping your head back and forth between which one do I go for. And after a few plays, you eventually realize, like, okay, I need to focus on just one or two of these. I can't try to go for all of them. And it's a very interesting experience, but it's great every time I get to it. Surprisingly, this was also my wife's pick. Another one that I was like, okay, fine. She wants a board game. I'll try it. And I fell in love with it too. It is such a good time. It's, again, very cozy, but also puzzly and thinky, and you just get to put together a very colorful and pretty quilt, man. It's a good time, and the game is always different. The objectives that you're going for are always different. Everything changes every time, and you really, you can't just come up with one strategy and stick to it. You really have to be ready to adapt a lot with this game, just like with Cascadia. So, there is that. Calico. Alright, and by my count, we are now down to the last 10 games that I have in person. I do have 2 being borrowed right now, which I will talk about at the end here. But moving on, next up we have Azul, which is a really nice puzzly game. This is another one I got early on, and my wife and I kind of came to a consensus on this one. We were both kind of eyeballing it, not too sure about it. And then we just looked at each other and said, why not? And we've enjoyed it. It's a great time. We later found out after getting it that there's several different versions that a lot of people prefer. I'm personally fine with just this. I don't need to get any other versions of Azul. If I want Azul, I can just go to this and have a good time with it. I don't mind not having those other versions. This one is great on its own, and I love it a lot. I wish there was a solo player mode to this. I might go on BGG and see what people put on the forums to see if there is a fan-made solo mode to maybe play with, because there's a lot of times that I want this experience that either I'm alone or my wife's just not in the mood for board games, and that's fine. There are just sometimes I wish that I could have this as one of my options to play solo, so I'm going to have to look into that and see if there's a way that I can do it, but that is Azul. This next one is one that I got because of my wife. She didn't pick it, I just got it for her, and my whole family fell in love with it. I fell in love with it, she loves it, my parents love it. It's a great game, and that is Abduction. For the cost of this game, the experience is just phenomenal. I mean, you get to pull ducks out of this little silicone UFO and try to arrange them in ways to get these cards which score you points at the end of the game. It's a very simple but intriguing game, and it doesn't even require a whole lot of thought. Just a little bit of, minor planning. You don't really get analysis paralysis with this game, although you might take a few seconds to think, and you're like, okay, I need to do this move before I can do that to make this thing work, and then I can get the card, and it plays so well. I love it. It does well at all player counts as far as I'm concerned, and it's a quick play. You can just sit there and play a few games back to back and not even really notice that any time has gone by, and I love it. It's a fantastic game. If you can get your hands on this, or if you don't have a local game store that carries it, you can even just go on Amazon and pick it up there. That's actually where I got mine before I even thought about going to my local game store. I'm very sad that I didn't support local, but at the same time, I'm very happy that I have this game. And I've supported local ever since to try and make up for that sin. So, I'm sorry to my LGS. This was the only time that I went on Amazon. I'm sorry. Next up here, we have the Night Cage. This is, as far as I can tell, the only horror... Well, this is one of 2 horror games that I have in my collection. And, horror board games are never going to be very scary. There's nothing that's, going to be really itching you or making it creepy. You can build up the atmosphere to kind of help do that, but this is just a really good time. I enjoy this. It's another cooperative game, oddly enough, which... it just plays really well. It's a really cool and interesting mechanics that I enjoy a lot. It's not the most well-produced thing ever or anything like that, but it is a good time and one that I can thoroughly enjoy. I mean, the thought of being in these very dark and narrow catacombs, trying to work your way around with a candle that has a chance of going out at any moment is it is a little frightening to think about when you get to that point, but it's just a good experience. If you can try it out, if someone has it, you can play with them, or your local game store has a copy to play test or whatever, give it a shot. It's worth it, I think. I quite enjoy the Night Cage. Next up is another fairly heavy Euro game, and that is Nucleum. I saw a lot of buzz around this one about a year ago. and I just knew that I wanted it. It looked really cool. It had a lot of very interesting aspects to it. Would I recommend this to a lot of people? Probably not. It does kind of take a specific taste to play and enjoy it, but everything it does, it fits right in my wheelhouse. You have an interesting mechanism between trick-taking or tile placement, and then also a worker placement aspect as well. And there's a lot of different things that you're doing at all times that just create this interesting experience that I can't really find a way to describe. But the time on it being 60 to 150 minutes is pretty accurate. It definitely is a bit of a rougher one. It takes a while to set up. It takes a while to play. But if you have the time for it and it's got this kind of stuff that you enjoy, I definitely recommend you give it a shot. That is Nucleum. Alright, and now we're on to my solo-only board games, because there are a lot of times where I'm either alone or it's just me and my wife, but she's reading a book or doing something else and she's not in the mood for board games. I like to have experiences that I can play by myself. That's why you'll notice a lot of these games that I presented today have solo player modes, but sometimes that's not always enough to just have games that have solo player modes. Sometimes it's nice to have those games that are designed for solo play, which is... They're usually done so well, and the ones I have so far, I applaud very highly. The first one is Conservas. You are a fishing company in Spain that is trying to, well, catch fish and then can them, but you also don't want to overfish, because then you'll run out of fish in the sea, and you won't be able to keep making money. So a lot of these months in this calendar have goals, they have sustainability goals where you need to have so many fish still in the ocean when you're done fishing that month. And there's a lot of cool things in this game that I really like. I didn't think I was going to be a huge bag builder type, but I got Quacks of Quedlinburg, and then I got this, and I love bags. I love bag builders now. It's great. It's also got some really cool mechanics in it, and it's easy to learn, easy to play. It's just great to have a good time with for anywhere from about 20 minutes to an hour, depending on what month you're playing and how you're playing it, and if you get into any analysis paralysis. But it's a great time. I absolutely love Conservas, and it has a lot of replayability to it, which is something I really appreciate in the solo game. Next up is the end of my solo player experience that I have in hand. That is the Final Girl series. I only have 4 boxes at the moment. But I am working on expanding this. So I have A Knock at the Door, Carnage at the Carnival, Into the Void, and Panic at Station 2891. All based on different horror movies, and they introduce them in really nice ways. You have to have the core box and at least 1 box to be able to play, but they have a ton of different movie boxes that you can use. And there's so many interesting things about these. They have different combinations of where you can play. You can mix different locations with different killers, with different final girls. And that sort of combination just, again, presents a lot of replayability that is so unique. And I love the design behind these too, because in these movie boxes, the lids come off and become the boards for the killers and the locations. The design around all of this game and this whole series is absolutely fantastic. It's very fun to play. For as small as the boxes are, though, it is a little bit of a table hog. It's not one of those you can just take with you anywhere and sit down and be able to play. It does have a pretty good amount of table presence, so do keep that in mind. This is one that I really enjoy having at home, and then just be able to mix and match as I feel like, or sometimes I'll even just take a single movie box and I will only play with that stuff, because sometimes you just want that theme of being like, hey, I'm in that movie. But then sometimes you're like, well, what if the strangers went to the carnival, or if they went to space, you know, or what if aliens randomly showed up at the cottage? There's a lot of cool different things you can do with this, and I don't know, I'm also a huge horror fan, so finding a set of games that was literally about horror movies, I'm sold. That was all there was to it. As soon as I heard that, I'm like, yes, that needs to be in my collection immediately. I absolutely love all of the Final Girl stuff. I'm working on expanding my collection with it. I'm not buying the season boxes. I'm just individually buying the boxes that I want. And I do have a few more on my wish list that I want to get. And I want to see if they expand and do more of these as well. So that's it for the games that I have in person. There's 3 that I don't have with me right now. The first one is Onirum, which is another solo game, and that's not with me because I like keeping that at work, because that is a simple card game that I can just whip out and play at in a few minutes on my breaks, which is kind of nice to have. It just helps fill that time for me. I'm looking into getting into Button Shy games. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I do want to have those around for a similar type of experience. I also want more games out of the Oniverse. I'm looking at like Sylveon and Castellion. Those games all look very great to me. But Onirum just sits at work because that isn't a game I really like to play at home as much. I like having that one out and about because it's just a quick solitaire game that I can whip out and have fun with. And then also somebody is currently borrowing Sagrada and Patchwork, which are both very good games. Patchwork is another 2-player game where you're just working on building out your quilt, moving the pawn along to determine what tiles you can purchase at any given time. And you're running out of time as you're building the quilt. You just got to build the best quilt before the other player and before time runs out. So that's a very good game, very good experience. Sagrada, you are building stained glass windows for a cathedral by drafting dice, and the values and the colors of those dice are very important to how you place them. Sagrada is a very popular game. I'm sure a lot of people know about it, so if you don't, there's plenty of things said on it. I might do my own review at some point as well. It's a very good game. It is, to me, it's along the same vein as Azul, but it has a solo mode built into it, which is very nice. I quite love it. Both games are separate, and they do have their differences, but to me, they're kind of in the same-ish category. But I love them both equally. They are both very good games. So, anyways, that is my collection today. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Again, try to guess my top 10 if you like, or at least just any of the games that are on there. And if you get any of them right, I'll give you a crisp high five in my next video. But thank you guys so much for tuning in today. As always, we hope you enjoy your stay, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.